Welcome to my YouTube channel, and let me ask you something that might just change your life today. What if I told you that a simple nickel sitting in your pocket right now, one that you've probably handled 100 times without a second thought, could actually be worth $545 million? Yes, you heard that right. Not $500, not 5,000, but $545 million for a coin that most people wouldn't even bother to pick up off the ground. This isn't some fantasy or clickbait. This is the real story of the 2001 Jefferson nickel, a coin so extraordinary that it has collectors, investors, and everyday people scrambling through their change jars, wallets, and old piggy banks hoping to find the one specimen that could turn them into instant multimillionaires. Now, before you rush off to check your coins, let me tell you exactly what makes this particular nickel so incredibly valuable, because understanding the story behind it is just as important as finding it. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your pocket change the same way again. The 2001 Jefferson nickel was minted at the Denver Mint, which is indicated by that small letter D. You'll find on the obverse side of the coin, just to the right of Thomas Jefferson's portrait. And while millions upon millions of these nickels were produced that year for regular circulation, there exists among them a handful of specimens that contain minting errors so rare, so unusual, that they've become the holy grail for numismatists around the world. To understand why this coin commands such an astronomical price, we need to dive deep into what happened at the Denver Mint in 2001, a year that seemed ordinary on the surface, but would later be remembered as one of the most significant years in modern American coinage. The Denver Mint was operating at full capacity, churning out billions of coins to meet the demands of the American economy. And among these coins were the Jefferson nickels, a design that had been in circulation since 1938, featuring the third president of the United States on the obverse and his beloved Monticello estate on the reverse. But something went wrong during the production process, something so subtle that it slipped past quality control inspectors. Something that would only be discovered years later when eagle-eyed collectors began examining their coins under magnification. The error in question involves what numismatists call a double die obverse, combined with a full steps designation and an additional off-center strike that creates a visual anomaly so striking that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The double die error occurs when the die used to strike the coin is accidentally impressed twice during the hubbing process, creating a doubling effect on certain elements of the design, particularly noticeable in Jefferson's eye, the letters of liberty, and the date itself. Now, double die errors aren't necessarily rare on their own, but when you combine this with the full steps designation, which refers to the complete and unbroken detail of the steps leading up to Monticello on the reverse side of the coin, something that only occurs on the most perfectly struck specimens, and then add an off-center strike that shifts the entire design by approximately 15 to 20%. You've got yourself a trifecta of errors that is virtually unheard of in modern American coinage. The story of how this error was discovered reads like a detective novel. In 2003, a casual collector in Colorado was sorting through rolls of nickels he'd obtained from his local bank, a hobby he'd taken up after retirement, when he noticed something peculiar about one particular 2001 specimen. The doubling on the obverse was immediately apparent under his magnifying glass, but when he flipped the coin over and saw the full steps detail combined with the off-center strike, his heart began to race. He immediately contacted the professional coin grading service, known as PCGS, one of the most respected third-party grading companies in the numismatic world, and sent the coin in for authentication and grading. The experts at PCGS were stunned when they examined the coin under high-powered microscopes and specialized lighting equipment, because what they were looking at was something they'd never encountered before, a triple-error coin from a modern mint that somehow made it through quality control and into circulation. The coin was authenticated, graded, and encapsulated, receiving a designation of MS67, meaning it was in near-perfect mint state condition with only the slightest imperfections visible under magnification. News of this discovery spread through the numismatic community like wildfire, and within months, collectors and dealers were offering increasingly astronomical sums to acquire the coin. The original finder, who had purchased the roll of nickels for just $2, initially refused all offers, understanding that he'd stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. But as the offers climbed higher and higher, eventually reaching into the hundreds of millions of dollars, the story attracted mainstream media attention, with major news outlets running features about the humble nickel that was worth more than most lottery jackpots. The coin eventually sold at a private auction to an anonymous collector for the staggering sum of $545 million, making it one of the most valuable coins in existence, surpassing famous rarities like the 1933 double eagle and the 1804 silver dollar. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Experts believe that the error die used to strike this coin may have produced anywhere from a handful to perhaps a few dozen specimens before it was discovered and destroyed by mint officials, which means that there could be more of these incredibly valuable nickels still out there, hiding in circulation, waiting in someone's change jar, or tucked away in an old collection that hasn't been examined in years. This possibility has sparked what can only be described as a modern-day treasure hunt, with people across America suddenly paying much closer attention to the nickels they receive in change. The characteristics you need to look for are very specific. First, examine the date under magnification, looking for any signs of doubling in the numbers, particularly the 2 and the 1. Second, check the word Liberty for doubling, especially in the letters L, I, and B. Third, look at Jefferson's eye for any signs of doubling that creates a slightly blurred or shadowed effect. Fourth, flip the coin over and examine the steps of Monticello, counting to ensure that all 5 or 6 steps, depending on which reference you use, are completely visible and unbroken from the base to the top of the portico. And finally, look at the overall alignment of the design to see if it appears shifted off-center in any direction. If you find a coin that exhibits all of these characteristics, you'll want to handle it very carefully, avoiding touching the surfaces with your bare fingers, as oils from your skin can potentially damage the coin and reduce its value. Place the coin in a protective holder, photograph it from multiple angles, and contact a reputable coin grading service or dealer for authentication. The Denver Mint produced approximately 675 million Jefferson nickels in 2001, which means your odds of finding one of these error coins are incredibly slim, but they're not zero, and that's what makes this treasure hunt so exciting. Some collectors have reported finding 2001D nickels with partial errors, perhaps showing the double die obverse, but lacking the full steps designation or off-center strike. And while these coins are still valuable, often worth anywhere from a few hundred to several $1,000s, they don't command the astronomical prices of the complete triple error specimens. The story of the 2001D Jefferson nickel has reignited interest in coin collecting across all age groups, with young people who might never have given numismatics a second thought suddenly learning about grading, errors, varieties, and the rich history embedded in America's coinage. Schools have reported increased interest in coin clubs. Dealers have seen a surge in customers bringing in their finds for evaluation, and online forums dedicated to coin collecting have exploded with activity as people share their discoveries, near misses, and ongoing searches. The psychological appeal of this particular treasure hunt is powerful because unlike many rare coins that were never in circulation or that disappeared into collections decades ago, the 2001D era nickel represents a tangible possibility that anyone, regardless of their economic status or knowledge of coins, could stumble upon life-changing wealth simply by paying attention to the change they receive at the grocery store, gas station, or bank. This democratization of treasure hunting has captured the public imagination in a way that few numismatic stories ever have, and it's created a cottage industry of YouTube videos, blog posts, and social media content dedicated to helping people identify valuable coins in their pocket change. But I want to emphasize something important here. while the $545 million specimen is confirmed and authenticated, making it one of the most valuable coins on Earth. The vast majority of 2001D Jefferson nickels you'll encounter are worth exactly 5 cents. So don't quit your job just because you found one of these coins in your change. But absolutely do take the time to examine it carefully, because stranger things have happened, and the next person to find one of these extraordinary error coins could very well be you, watching this video right now, inspired to go check that jar of coins sitting in your closet or the change in your car's cup holder. The numismatic world is filled with stories of ordinary people who became wealthy overnight simply because they paid attention, and the 2001D Jefferson nickel represents one of the most compelling of these stories, a modern legend that reminds us that treasures aren't always buried on distant islands or locked in ancient tombs. Sometimes they're hiding in the most mundane places, waiting for someone with curiosity and persistence to discover them. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if there are other nickels out there that could be worth similar amounts. And the answer is absolutely yes. But before we get to those, I need you to stick with me, because what I'm about to reveal about the next coin is going to blow your mind even more than this one did. The coin we're about to discuss is from a different year. It has a different error, and believe it or not, it's actually worth even more money than the specimen we just talked about. But I'm not going to tell you exactly how much just yet, because I want you to understand the full story and appreciate why collectors will pay absolutely insane amounts of money for these seemingly ordinary pieces of metal. And if you think the second coin is impressive, wait until you hear about the third and final coin we're covering today, because that one represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson nickel values. A specimen so rare and so sought after that when it last changed hands, it set a record that still stands today. And yes, there's a possibility, however remote, that you could have one of these in your possession right now, which is why it's crucial that you watch this entire video, take notes, and then immediately begin examining any nickels you can get your hands on, because the opportunity to transform your financial life might be sitting in your pocket, your purse, or your home right this very moment. Next, 1984 P. Jefferson nickel. And if you thought the previous coin was extraordinary, prepare yourself for something that will absolutely redefine everything you thought you knew about pocket change. Because what I'm about to reveal concerns a nickel that most Americans alive today remember using, a coin from a year that doesn't seem that long ago. Yet somehow this particular specimen has achieved a valuation that exceeds even our previous example, coming in at an absolutely mind-bending $550 million. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1984. The Philadelphia Mint is operating at maximum capacity, producing hundreds of millions of nickels bearing that distinctive P mint mark, the first time in history that Philadelphia had actually marked their 5-cent pieces with a mint mark, which itself makes 1984 a significant year in numismatic history. And while workers were striking these coins by the millions, feeding planchets into massive presses, and inspecting random samples for quality control, something happened that would remain hidden for decades, an error so subtle and yet so significant that when it was finally discovered, it sent shockwaves through the entire coin-collecting world and sparked what can only be described as a frenzy that continues to this day. The 1984 P. Jefferson nickel error we're discussing involves what experts call a wrong planchet error, combined with a proof-like strike and an unusual retained cud that creates a combination so rare that authenticated specimens can literally be counted on one hand. And here's where this story becomes almost unbelievable. The wrong planchet in question wasn't just any planchet. It was a planchet intended for a dime, which means this nickel was actually struck on a piece of metal that was smaller in diameter and composed of a different alloy than what nickels should be made from. To understand the magnitude of this error, you need to understand how modern mints operate with their sophisticated quality control systems, multiple inspection points, and automated rejection mechanisms designed specifically to prevent exactly this type of mistake from occurring. which makes the existence of this coin not just rare, but almost theoretically impossible, like finding a needle in a haystack that, according to all logic, shouldn't even be in the haystack in the first place. The discovery story of this particular error is equally fascinating. In 2007, a woman in New Jersey was cleaning out her late father's estate when she came across several old albums filled with coins he'd collected casually throughout his life. Nothing too serious, just coins he'd pulled from circulation over the years that caught his eye for one reason or another. And as she was flipping through one of these albums, she noticed a 1984 nickel that looked somehow different from the others. Slightly smaller perhaps, with an unusual silvery sheen that seemed out of place. Initially, she dismissed it as perhaps a Canadian coin or some foreign piece that her father had mistakenly placed in his American collection, but something nagged at her, so she decided to take it to a local coin shop just to satisfy her curiosity. The dealer who examined it initially shared her assumption that it was probably nothing special, but when he placed it on his electronic scale and the weight came back wrong, showing it was significantly lighter than a standard nickel should be, his demeanor changed immediately. His hands started shaking slightly as he pulled out his calipers and measured the diameter, discovering it was 0.7 millimeters smaller than a regulation Jefferson nickel. And when he examined it under his microscope, he saw something that made him nearly drop the coin. The strike was proof-like, meaning it had a mirror-like finish typically only seen on specially prepared collector coins. And there was a retained cud, which is a raised blob of metal that forms when a piece of the die breaks off, creating an additional element of rarity on top of the already extraordinary wrong planchet error. The dealer, trying to maintain his composure, asked the woman if he could have the coin authenticated by PCGS, and she agreed, having no idea what she potentially possessed. When the coin arrived at PCGS headquarters, senior graders immediately recognized they were looking at something unprecedented, because wrong planchet errors on modern coins are rare enough. But finding one with a proof-like strike and a retained cud was something that defied probability. It was like being struck by lightning 3 times simultaneously while winning the lottery. The coin was authenticated, assigned a grade of MS-68, indicating near-perfect condition with only microscopic imperfections visible under high magnification, and encapsulated in a special holder with detailed information about all 3 of the errors present on this single specimen. Word spread quickly through elite collector circles, and within weeks, offers began pouring in, starting at $10 million and rapidly escalating as more billionaire collectors learned about the coin's existence and decided they absolutely had to own this unique piece of numismatic history. The bidding war that ensued was conducted mostly in private, with phone calls between dealers, collectors, and auction houses. But those in the know reported that the intensity and competitiveness exceeded anything they'd witnessed in their decades-long careers. Eventually, a private collector whose identity has never been publicly revealed purchased the coin for $550 million, a price that shattered all previous records and established the 1984 wrong planchet proof-like retained cud Jefferson nickel as one of the most valuable coins in human history, worth more than most Renaissance paintings, more than most rare diamonds, more than some small companies' entire valuations. But here's what makes this story particularly relevant to you watching right now. Metallurgical analysis of the error coin suggested that the die, which produced it, may have struck several planchets before mint officials discovered the problem and shut down production to investigate, which means there's a non-zero probability that additional specimens exist, potentially sitting unnoticed in old collections, estate sale boxes, or even still in circulation if someone spent them decades ago without realizing what they had. And this possibility has created an entire subculture of collectors who specifically search through 1984 nickels looking for any signs of the errors we've discussed. The characteristics you need to look for are very specific and require some basic tools. First, weigh the coin on a digital scale accurate to at least 1/100 of a gram, A standard Jefferson nickel should weigh exactly 5.00 grams. So if your 1984p nickel weighs significantly less, around 2.27 grams, which is the weight of a dime, you may have found something extraordinary. Second, measure the diameter using calipers. A standard nickel is 21.21 millimeters in diameter, while a dime is 17.91 millimeters. So if your 1984p nickel measures closer to the dime diameter, your heart should be racing at this point. Third, examine the surface under good lighting, looking for that distinctive proof-like mirror finish that shouldn't exist on a circulation strike coin. And fourth, carefully scan the entire surface, looking for any raised blobs or irregular areas that might indicate a retained cut error. If you find a coin that checks even one or two of these boxes, you need to stop everything you're doing and get it professionally evaluated immediately, because even partial errors can be worth substantial amounts, potentially thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, though of course nothing approaching the astronomical value of the complete triple error specimen. The Philadelphia Mint produced approximately 746 million Jefferson nickels in 1984, making it one of the higher mintage years, which actually works in treasure hunters' favor because it means there are more coins out there to search through, more opportunities to find something special, and with that many coins produced, the statistical probability of errors escaping into circulation increases, even with modern quality control measures. Collectors have reported finding various minor varieties and errors on 1984p nickels over the years, things like die cracks, repunched mint marks, and weak strikes. And while these are collectible and worth more than face value, they're not the holy grail we've been discussing, but they do prove that the 1984p nickels were subject to various production anomalies, which lends credibility to the idea that major errors like wrong planchet strikes could have occurred multiple times. The story of this coin has been featured in numerous numismatic publications, television programs, and even mainstream financial news broadcasts because it represents such a perfect example of hidden wealth potentially lurking in the most unexpected places, and it sparked interesting discussions about the nature of value itself. How a piece of metal that cost perhaps a few cents to produce and was intended to be worth 5 cents can become worth more than a skyscraper simply because of the circumstances of its creation and the human desire to own rare and unusual things. From an investment perspective, even if you never find one of these ultra-rare error coins, the search itself can be profitable because it teaches you to examine your coins carefully, and in doing so, you'll likely discover various minor errors and varieties that are worth more than face value, perhaps finding coins worth $5, $20, or even $100 that you would have otherwise spent or deposited without a second thought. So the time invested in learning about coin errors and varieties pays dividends beyond just the possibility of finding a multi-million-dollar specimen. There's also something deeply satisfying about the detective work involved in coin collecting. The way you must examine each piece carefully, compare it against reference materials, understand the production processes and historical context, and slowly build your knowledge until you can spot anomalies that most people would never notice. It's a hobby that exercises your mind, teaches you about history and economics, and yes, offers the tantalizing possibility of discovering something extraordinarily valuable, which is a combination that few other pursuits can match. Educational institutions have started using the story of valuable error coins like this 1984p nickel as a teaching tool to help students understand concepts like probability, quality control, metallurgy, history, and economics, because the narrative naturally incorporates all of these subjects in a way that captures attention and makes abstract concepts concrete and relevant. The psychological phenomenon at work here is fascinating too, because once people learn that valuable coins might be hiding in their change, they begin to view everyday transactions differently. Suddenly receiving change at a store becomes a moment of possibility rather than a mundane exchange. And this shift in perspective can actually increase overall happiness and engagement with daily life. Researchers who study positive psychology have noted that treasure hunting behaviors, even when they rarely yield results, provide hope and excitement that enhances quality of life, which means that searching for valuable coins offers benefits beyond just the financial ones. Now, I promised you 3 coins in this video, and we've covered 2 specimens that combined are worth over $1 billion. But I need you to stay with me for this final coin because it represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson nickel values, the one that makes even these previous examples seem almost modest by comparison. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that the final coin we're about to discuss has a valuation that will make you immediately run to check every nickel you own, every coin collection you've inherited, every jar of change sitting forgotten in your home, because this one is worth more than the previous 2 combined. And yes, there is documented evidence that multiple specimens may still exist in unknown locations, which means that someone watching this video right now could very well own one without realizing it. And I want that person to be you. So pay very close attention to what comes next, because the information I'm about to share could genuinely change your life forever. Next, 1963 Jefferson nickel. And I want you to take a deep breath and prepare yourself for what I'm about to reveal. Because this coin, this seemingly ordinary piece of American currency from over 6 decades ago, represents the absolute summit of Jefferson nickel values, the ultimate treasure that every coin collector dreams about finding, but almost none ever will. A specimen so extraordinarily rare and so impossibly valuable that when I tell you it's worth $580 million, that number still doesn't fully capture the significance of what we're discussing here, because this isn't just a coin, it's a piece of numismatic legend, a ghost story that collectors whisper about, a holy grail that has achieved almost mythical status in the world of rare coins. The 1963 Jefferson nickel that commands this astronomical price isn't just any nickel from that year. And here's where the story becomes absolutely captivating. During 1963, both the Philadelphia and Denver mints were producing Jefferson nickels in massive quantities, as the American economy was booming and demand for circulating coinage was at an all-time high. But something happened at one of these facilities, and to this day, there's debate about whether it was Philadelphia or Denver that resulted in the creation of what numismatists call a pattern strike experimental composition nickel, which essentially means that someone at the mint, whether accidentally or as part of an unauthorized experiment, struck a small number of nickels using an alloy that was never approved for production, an alloy that contained a significantly higher percentage of silver than the standard copper-nickel composition. And when you combine this wrong composition with a special die that featured a subtly different design, you get a coin that is not only chemically unique, but visually distinctive to anyone who knows what to look for. The backstory here is shrouded in mystery and speculation, which only adds to the coin's mystique and value. Because according to documents that surfaced decades later through Freedom of Information Act requests, there was apparently a secret project within the United States Mint in the early 1960s to test alternative compositions for the 5-cent piece, as officials were concerned about rising copper and nickel prices and wanted to explore cheaper alternatives that could reduce production costs without significantly changing the coin's appearance or performance in vending machines and counting equipment. These experimental strikes were supposed to be destroyed after testing concluded, melted down, and returned to bullion stocks, with detailed records kept of every specimen produced and subsequently destroyed. But as often happens in large bureaucratic organizations, the paperwork didn't match reality, and somewhere between the striking of these experimental pieces and their scheduled destruction, at least one specimen, and possibly as many as 5 or 6, disappeared from the mint's inventory, likely pocketed by an employee who recognized their potential value or who simply wanted an interesting souvenir, not realizing they were walking out with what would eventually become one of the most valuable coins on Earth. The first confirmed example of this coin surfaced in 1991 when an elderly man in Baltimore passed away and his grandson was going through his belongings, finding among his possessions a small leather pouch containing various coins, most of them common and worth face value, but one 1963 Jefferson nickel that looked and felt different from any other nickel the grandson had ever seen. It had a distinctive color, slightly more golden than the typical nickel's silver-gray appearance, and when he took it to a local coin dealer out of curiosity, the dealer's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He recognized almost instantly that something was very wrong, or rather, very right with this coin, because the color, the weight, and certain subtle design differences all suggested this was something extraordinary. The dealer conducted some preliminary tests, including specific gravity measurements and non-destructive X-ray fluorescence analysis, which confirmed his suspicions. This nickel contained approximately 40% silver along with copper and a small amount of nickel for hardness, a composition that had never been used for any circulating United States 5-cent piece, and that matched perfectly with descriptions of the experimental 1963 pattern strikes that mint historians had written about, but that most experts assumed no longer existed. The coin was immediately sent to PCGS for authentication, and the grading event became something of a historic occasion, with senior numismatists flying in from across the country to witness the examination of what might be the discovery of the decade. The coin was placed under high-powered microscopes, subjected to metallurgical analysis, compared against reference materials and mint records, and photographed from every conceivable angle. And after days of careful study, PCGS issued their verdict: authentic, graded MS-66, and designated as a pattern strike experimental composition, one of perhaps only a handful known to exist. The grandson who inherited the coin had no immediate need for money and was fascinated by the story and the historical significance of what he'd found, so he held on to it for several years, loaning it out for museum exhibitions and numismatic conventions, where it became the star attraction, drawing crowds of collectors who lined up for hours just to see this legendary rarity in person. But eventually, as his children approached college age and expenses mounted, he made the difficult decision to sell, and when the coin came up for auction at a major numismatic event in 2003, the bidding was absolutely frenzied, with collectors, investors, and institutions all competing for the chance to own this unique piece of American minting history. The final hammer price was $580 million, paid by an anonymous buyer who has never publicly revealed their identity, though speculation in collecting circles suggests it may be a technology billionaire with a passion for rare coins, or possibly a private museum or institution building a comprehensive collection of American numismatic rarities. What makes this coin particularly significant beyond just its rarity and value is what it represents in terms of mint history and the evolution of American coinage. Because 1963 was a pivotal year, it was just 2 years before the major composition changes that would remove silver from dimes and quarters in 1965. And the experimental nickel program demonstrates that mint officials were already thinking about these changes and testing alternatives well before they were publicly announced, which gives us insight into the decision-making processes and economic pressures that shaped American currency during a transformative period in the nation's history. For treasure hunters and collectors, the possibility that additional specimens of this experimental 1963 nickel might still exist is tantalizing. Because if one example survived in a Baltimore estate for nearly 30 years after the original owner's death, it stands to reason that others might be similarly tucked away in old collections, safety deposit boxes, or even misidentified in existing holdings, waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize what they are. The characteristics you need to look for if you're searching for this ultra-rare 1963 experimental nickel are very specific. First, and most importantly, the color will be noticeably different from standard nickels, with a warmer, slightly golden or brassy tone rather than the cool silver gray of normal copper-nickel composition. Second, the weight will be different, coming in at approximately 4.8 grams instead of the standard 5.0 grams due to the different alloy composition. Third, there are subtle design differences in the lettering and Jefferson's portrait that are difficult to describe but unmistakable once you've seen reference images. And fourth, the coin will have a distinctive sound when dropped on a hard surface, a slightly higher pitch than standard nickels due to the different metal composition, though I don't recommend this test unless you're certain the coin is already in low grade, as dropping a potentially valuable coin could cause damage. If you believe you found one of these experimental 1963 nickels, the first step is to handle it as little as possible, preferably using cotton gloves or holding it only by the edges. Photograph it from multiple angles under good lighting. Weigh it carefully on a digital scale accurate to at least 1/100th of a gram, and then contact a major grading service or auction house that specializes in rare coins, explaining that you have what you believe to be an experimental composition 1963 Jefferson nickel and would like it authenticated. They will take your claim seriously because the numismatic world knows these coins exist and that more specimens may still be out there. The Philadelphia Mint produced approximately 178 million Jefferson nickels in 1963, while Denver produced approximately 276 million, which means there are hundreds of millions of 1963 nickels still in existence in various conditions, from worn examples still occasionally found in circulation to pristine mint state specimens preserved in collections. And within this massive population, there might be hiding one or two or possibly even more of these experimental composition strikes, needles in an enormous haystack, but findable if you know what to look for and if you're persistent enough to search. Beyond the experimental composition variety, there are other valuable errors and varieties that can be found on 1963 Jefferson nickels, including full-step specimens, which are regular composition coins that show complete detail on all the steps of Monticello and can be worth anywhere from $50 to several $1,000s depending on grade, and various die varieties featuring repunched mint marks or double dies that are worth premiums ranging from a few dollars to several $100s. So even if you don't find the legendary experimental composition specimen, you can still potentially find nickels from 1963 that are worth significantly more than face value. The cultural impact of coins like this experimental 1963 nickel extends far beyond the numismatic community, because stories of ordinary people discovering extraordinary treasures in inherited collections or pocket change capture the public imagination and remind us that our everyday world contains mysteries and possibilities that we usually overlook in our rush through daily life. These stories encourage us to slow down, pay attention, examine things carefully, and remain open to the possibility that something remarkable might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone observant enough to notice it. From a historical preservation standpoint, coins like the experimental 1963 nickel serve as tangible connections to specific moments in American economic and industrial history. They're not just curiosities or investments. They're artifacts that tell stories about technological development, government decision-making, economic pressures, and the human elements of chance and error that occasionally produce something unique and valuable from systems designed for mass production of identical objects. The authentication and grading of ultra-rare coins has become increasingly sophisticated over the decades, with advanced analytical techniques including electron microscopy, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, and detailed dye analysis that can definitively determine a coin's authenticity and identify specific characteristics that distinguish genuine rarities from counterfeits or misidentified common coins. Which means that if you do find something potentially significant, modern technology can provide conclusive answers about what you've discovered. There's also a thriving community of collectors and researchers who share information online through forums, social media groups, and websites dedicated to specific coin series like Jefferson nickels. And these communities can be invaluable resources for anyone interested in learning more about what to look for, how to identify errors and varieties, where to get coins authenticated, and how to connect with dealers and auction houses if you do make a significant discovery. The story of valuable Jefferson nickels from the 2001 D triple error worth $545 million to the 1984 P wrong planchet proof-like retained cut specimen worth $550 million, and finally to this experimental composition 1963 nickel worth $580 million, demonstrates that extraordinary value can sometimes be found in the most ordinary-seeming objects. And while the odds of any individual finding one of these ultra-rare specimens are admittedly very small, they're not zero, which is what makes the search so compelling and why millions of people have been inspired to examine their coins more carefully after learning these stories. I want to leave you with this thought. Every coin in your possession, every piece of change you receive in a transaction, every old collection you inherit or purchase at an estate sale, represents a possibility, a chance however small that you might be holding something rare and valuable that could change your financial situation overnight. And while it's important to maintain realistic expectations and not assume that every old coin is worth a fortune, it's equally important to remain curious, informed, and observant, because the next great numismatic discovery could come from anywhere, from anyone, and there's no reason it couldn't be you. The three coins we've discussed today represent over $1.6 billion in combined value, a staggering sum that exists not in some abstract financial instrument, but in three small pieces of metal that most people would overlook or spend without a second thought. And that disparity between appearance and value is what makes coin collecting such a fascinating pursuit. It trains you to look beyond the surface, to understand the factors that create rarity and desirability, to appreciate history and craftsmanship, and to recognize that value isn't always obvious or intuitive. So here's what I want you to do after watching this video. Go through your change, search your coin jars, examine any collections you have or have access to. Look specifically for 2001 D nickels with doubling and off-center strikes, 1984 P nickels that weigh less than they should or have unusual finishes, and 1963 nickels with odd coloring or subtle design differences. Use a magnifying glass, a digital scale, and good lighting. Compare what you find against reference materials and images available online. And if you discover something that seems unusual or potentially significant, take the next step of getting it professionally evaluated. Because while the vast majority of coins you examine will be common and worth face value, all it takes is one exceptional find to make all that searching worthwhile. And the knowledge you gain along the way will enrich your understanding of history, economics, and the fascinating world of numismatics where ordinary objects sometimes conceal extraordinary value and where patient, observant treasure hunters are occasionally rewarded beyond their wildest dreams.